The world is changed. I feel it in the water. I feel it in the earth. I smell it in the air. Much that once was is lost, for none now live who remember it.
Shadow of Mordor came out almost 3 years ago. It was an interesting take on the Lord of the Rings universe. The combat was stellar, the story engaging, and of course, the Nemesis system was created. The game tried new things in the world of third-person story adventures, even if the new system fell short of what was originally promised. But Shadow of War improves on every aspect of its original concepts, while at the same time expanding it. It's high fantasy at its finest. For those who haven't played Shadow of Mordor, the sequel does a great job of explaining the events that lead up to the second game, via cutscenes from the start of your adventure. The story is set around a Gondor ranger named Talion, who watches his family being murdered by orcs of Sauron. By chance, the tortured spirit of Celebrimbor, who helped create some of Sauron's rings of power, happens to latch onto Talion during his passing through the Wraith world. They fuse and together set out to destroy Sauron and his forces.
The Palantir is our concern. We must seize it before it falls into Sauron's hands. With it, his armies will be unstoppable. The fate of the city matters not.
The first game left off with Celebrimbor forging a new ring of power to rival Sauron's, and this is exactly where the events of Shadow of War begin. If you're a fan of the Lord of the Rings novels, there's a ton of stuff for you here. It's clear that the developers at Monolith were fans of the books, movies, and dive deep into the lore of the Lord of the Rings universe. I myself am a huge Tolkien fan of both the movies and books. The game takes many liberties with characters, like Shelob, for example, who is a major baddie for the majority of the game.
Spider does not forfeit its prey, Ranger. Not unless a greater has set before it.
However, instead of her being a giant spider, she transforms into a woman during your interactions with her. Some fans may not like this, but as a huge fan of her character both in the novels and in the History of Middle-earth series, I was happy to see her time in the limelight. After all, she is a spawn of an ancient god and could speak the common tongue, so why not expand on this idea? It's liberties like this that make the game fun and expand the game universe overall. It's also interesting to see iconic locations in the world, such as Minas Morgul before it fell into the hands of Mordor. It's an epic adventure that pulls heavily using Tolkien's mythos, and it improves the story and gameplay of the game itself, even if it's not official Tolkien lore.
How much are you willing to sacrifice? To suffer.
I have given up everything.
There's also the writing, which is excellent, especially for Celebrimbor.
You have doomed us, Talion. Her power was vast before, and now you have given her mine. I poured my life force into that ring.
Hearing him worry about an enemy to say, "This is beyond the skill of Celebrimbor," is flat out awesome, and a lot of the writing may go unnoticed by gamers who have not read the books, but for others, it's just icing on the cake.
This foe is beyond us, Celebrimbor.
The whole story is fun, epic, and bursting with Lord of the Rings flair. If you've played Shadow of Mordor or the Batman Arkham series, the combat will be familiar. The game borrows heavily from the Batman Arkham combat design, which makes sense since WB Interactive is the publisher of the series as well. But it's not a bad thing at all. The combat, in every way, shape, and form, is epic. You feel a sense of power and grace while fighting, and it's something you have to master as well. During the later part of the game, strategy and tactics on how to tackle a fight are imperative to your success. Simply running in and spamming attack, casually parrying won't work. You have to play smart. The game does a great job at introducing you to new combat mechanics. After all, the combat is the core of the gameplay, and it gets insanely deep with combos, movesets, special attacks, and an interesting talent tree to pour points into. The game also has RPG levels of depth, such as armor, weapons, and gems you slot into certain items to give them extra effects, like bonus damage or lifesteal. The enemy types in Shadow of War have a nice amount of variety, from orc grunts to giant war trolls. Each enemy has a different way to tackle them, but the most innovative part of the game is, of course, the Nemesis system.
I've had enough of your mouth, Bruce. So now I'm gonna kill you, for all these orcs to see.
The Nemesis system has been updated and improved on exponentially. In each city/hub location, there is a hierarchy of orcs. These start small, like captains, and eventually go into war chiefs, which I'll talk about a bit later. You gain intel by dominating certain orcs you find through different zones, or by simply finding them laying around in the world on tables or in tents. This intel helps you find out more about these special enemies in the Nemesis system, giving you important information. For example, some of these enemies are frightened by fire, others are immune to stuns. It pays off to get as much intel as possible and makes the fights much easier. Don't get me wrong, you can totally rush into a captain or war chief fight without getting any intel, but the game strongly suggests you do so, as some of these fights are incredibly tough without it. The game introduces an impressive fortress and sieging mechanic for the first time. War chiefs are often in charge of these cities/fortresses, and eventually you must take them over. But instead of just doing a one-on-one fight with the war chief himself, you're tasked with the duty to siege the city. The game allows you to build an army by dominating certain high-level orcs to fight for you, like in the first game. However, it expands greatly on this. Before sieging a fortress, you choose units, captains, and infantry that will fight for you in the walls. For example, I can choose to have a battalion of war trolls, or choose orc assassins with poison weapons to help me. I can choose to have heavy artillery bombard the city, or my personal favorite, swarms of spiderlings to infiltrate the fortress and cause chaos in the ranks. And of course, dragons, that you can actually ride and control during the siege. Shadow of War gives you the feeling of being a general in something as epic as the Battle for Helm's Deep, giving you choices to dedicate resources to seize the city in the best way possible. The things you choose do matter greatly. In one instance, I was running around helping my army defeat captains, only to get gameplay paused to see an enemy orc captain dying to swarms of spiders somewhere else in the fortress, or seeing an enemy high-ranking orc get beheaded by one of my own captains. It's a great sense of accomplishment and pride when you're not carrying the siege solo. It's a well thought out system that fits perfectly in the game's design, not to mention the actual relationships with the orcs that joined me. I felt a sense of sadness if they fell during a siege. In one instance, I was so upset by the loss of my war troll captain, I reloaded my last save and tried again, this time without losing him. I haven't cared about a character that much since the Mass Effect franchise.
Oh, just make sure you let me pop his heads off, won't ya?
If the game's guilty of anything, it's giving you too much to do. The world is seemingly bursting with content and side objectives. In cities, you can overtake towers, very Assassin's Creed-like. Upon taking a tower, you find hidden things within the city, such as collectibles, a Memories of Sheila minigame, and side missions featuring the fall and demise of Celebrimbor. The game gives you so much to keep you occupied, and with great combat, you never get tired of doing any of it. It's a perfect example of a studio taking an already solid game and improving it on every front. I highly recommend Shadow of War. It's a fantastic game with a near flawless execution. The only downside is we know how the story ends. Sauron succeeds in killing Talion's forces and nearly destroys the realm of Middle-earth. However, the journey is enjoyable, and the characters you help or hinder throughout your playthrough makes it a memorable experience. If you're looking for a AAA single-player game that's bursting to the seams with content, look no further than Shadow of War.
A wizard is never late, Frodo Baggins. Nor is he early. He arrives precisely when he means to.